Half a day. I'm Troy Torres with Candid News, and this is our, dry run, but it's like a real show. But a dry run for the news. We're in the studio right now. We haven't totally finished it, but we're getting there, and I'm kind of excited to be doing this. Before we start with the hard news and our look at, I started at an investigative piece into a monopoly that Matson is trying to attain, Matson Shipping or Matson Navigation Shipping or whatever it's called. There are way more important news stories and their birthdays. So off of Facebook, and I hardly ever click that say happy birthday button thing because I get distracted easily, and so I'm just like scrolling through and I just scroll or whatever. So this is giving me an opportunity for me to say happy birthday to my Facebook friends, starting with my zestie Anna Murphy Babata, May Rose Panaby. Oh, I had no idea Facebook says how old you are. Julius Santos, Steve, I need to get rid of my birthday. Steve Solis, Gabriel Brooks, Norman Taruk, Mark Moore, Janine Guevara, Jerome Eclarino, Ben Scott Schiff, Christina Gumatautal, Isaac Elbilal, Ignacia Cruz, J.R. Connor, Joe, Larafaliaro, I'm so sorry, Violet Laboriante, Terrence Sablon, Carlos Garcia, Christina Gumatautal, and Donna Iriarty. Happy birthday to you. In like 30 minutes, it won't be your birthday anymore, but I still caught it, so happy birthday. So tonight we bring you the first in a series of stories regarding Matson Navigation. And it's a piece that Johnny Rosario and I worked on. Johnny has a segment upcoming here, but let's just starting it off. From about 4,000 years ago until the 16th century, everything the people of Guam ate and made clothes and shelter from came from Guam. And then three things happened. First, we started building our own ships, called the Sekman. Second, ships started coming here. And third, we stopped building our own ships and got out of the shipping business altogether. By the time the Spaniards took the government of Guam, took over the government of Guam, it was their ships from Spanish-approved merchants that came to our island, opening for our people the variety of foods, garments, and raw materials from throughout the world via Spain's shipping network. Aside from the entry of air cargo planes in the mid-20th century, nothing has changed in the last 500 years about the importance of bringing ships to Guam that carry all the items we order from different countries throughout the world. Nothing but three things. The ships and the technology of the shipping industry has changed. That's one change. Another significant change involves how we've gone from relying on Guam's natural resources for everything we've consumed to depending on tens of thousands of off-island manufacturers to create what we will consume and then to ship these things to us. The third major change is the exponential increase in political and economic power that shippers have been able to use against the people of this region. Shipping is such a powerful force in the world, directly affecting the price of everything, that the United States, in its infant days, stood up a navy just for this purpose. The importance of protecting American cargo aboard those ships meant protecting those ships. And in 1920, Congress did just that when it declared that no ship could drop off and pick up cargo between one U.S. port and another U.S. port unless that ship was constructed in the United States and belonged to a company that is owned, operated, and employs American citizens or permanent resident aliens. This has been the law since Congress passed the Merchant Marine Act of 1920 and President Woodrow Wilson signed it. We commonly know it as the Jones Act, and we'll tell you why it's called that in just a bit. An interesting side note involves President Wilson. This law followed World War I, when the United States economy was struggling with the heavy weight of the war debt and increasing stagnation that eventually fed into the Great Depression. One of the reasons frequently cited by the U.S. shipping companies and that benefit from the Jones Act is that it was created to protect U.S. commercial ships during peacetime and war from foreign sabotage or from engineering that did not meet American standards. The example used by President Wilson and by the Secretary of War, along with members of Congress, was the sinking of the RMS Lusitania in 1915. The Lusitania and a related matter known as the Zimmerman Telegraph became the public and political rally cry that encouraged President Wilson to ask Congress for a declaration of war against Germany and enter America into World War I. Lusitania was a passenger ship that also carried cargo in a fast-growing North Atlantic trade and tourist route at the start of the 20th century. On the day it was sunk, the ship was carrying over 1,900 people or passengers, and Germany and England already were at war. It also was carrying 128 American citizens. When the torpedo from the German U-boat hit the ship and it capsized in 20 minutes, following not one, but 2 explosions from just one torpedo, people started to wonder what was going on. The Allies speculated to the public a German conspiracy. But what the British and American governments never told their people, both before the ship set sail, nor ever, is that there was something else aboard that ship, 178 tons of munitions. It was the reason Germany sank the ship. This information did not become public until 2014 when it was disclosed. So in essence, the Jones Act was predicated on a hoax, one that led to the largest number of war casualties than any war before or after it, and one that has made the people of the U.S. territories, Hawaii and Alaska, economic victims of just one company, Matson. Johnny Rosario now has more.
When Wilson signed the law in 1920, there were far more shipping companies that fell under the Jones Act. The problem over the decades has been that other countries build ships for far less than what the American shipbuilders charge. Slowly but surely, all the Jones Act has done is created a natural culling of competition in the shipping industry so that one giant is left standing, effectively creating a super monopoly with the power to dictate the price over everything in places like Guam, the CNMI, and the rest of Micronesia. Shipping within the United States is not something that is all important for the 48 contiguous states. Why? Well, because there's no ocean that divides them. Once products come from China, Europe, or wherever from foreign ships and drop off this cargo at the west, east, or the southeastern coast, American stores throughout the country get their products from the trucking industry. The American shipping industry could close tomorrow, and not a single price on store shelves would rise even by a penny. Matson and the other U.S. flag shipping lines are irrelevant to the 48 out of 50 states. But for Hawaii, Alaska, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, America Samoa, the CNMI, and here at home, it's a much different story. In order to get things from the United States mainland to any of our islands or Alaska, a ship or a plane needs to take it, because the Jones Act says that foreign shippers can't do that. Foreign shippers also can't bring products to Guam or anywhere else in the U.S. And while they're here, load our containers going out, then go to the CNMI and get their containers, etc. There's really no competition for the territories, Alaska and Hawaii. The Jones Act created the perfect conditions for a day to come when only one shipping company will be legally able to ship the things we need to and from here. That day came in 2011. For several years, Guam businesses were used to the choice between Horizon Shipping and Matson. 8 years ago, though Horizon announced its pulling out of the Guam route, by 2012, Matson had gained a monopoly over shipping, not just in Guam, but throughout the entire region. Rates increased almost overnight, and while Matson was unable to stop those rate increases, it managed to invest tons of money into a marketing campaign that painted them to be the adopted hometown boy, without whom we could not survive. While it's true that our survival will endure a major test if every shipper pulled out, it wasn't true that no shippers wanted to come here. Enter American President Lines, or APL. Today, it has 30% of the market share in shipping. Most importantly, when it entered the market and ended Matson's monopoly, APL offered significantly lower prices, forcing Matson to compete and killing Matson's corporate dream of profit building at the expense of Guam's already struggling people. How did APL do it? How did they muscle their way past the behemoth corporate monster for a chance to compete in this region? The shipper has fewer ships, and it's not a Jones Act company. It seems the story of the Lusitania has haunted the U.S. government all these years. So much so that the naval defense policy shifted so forcefully since 1986 that it is able to affect commercial shippers despite the Jones Act. President Reagan, who was the first to authorize what's called a Maritime Security Program, or MSP. President Clinton reauthorized it in 1996. The younger President Bush in 2003, then President Obama in 2013. The program will end in 2025 if it is not reauthorized by then. The MSP is an extraordinary program that came about for two main reasons. The first is that the Navy's presence is shifting from Europe and the Middle East to Asia and the Pacific. With the new strategy comes a military buildup throughout this region. And with the buildup comes the need to move construction materials, equipment, supplies, and troops from the country into all these different territories and host of countries. The movement of cargo and troops in support of America's wars and the defense of the nation during peacetime was the fundamental and founding reason for the Navy. That is until President Reagan noticed how much it costs to build ships in the United States. The Jones Act applies to everyone, including the military. So as America's aging fleet of ships has one by one been retired, President Reagan changed the Navy's operational tradition. Sailors aboard warships are to continue their readiness mission during peacetime, and they are to support and transport the armed services during war. It was no longer affordable for the country to replace naval supply ships with new ones made in the USA, nor did it make sense to maintain wartime levels of sailors just to move cargo. So Reagan and all his successors outsourced the transportation of materials and supplies for forward military activities during peacetime. Shipping companies that met strict American standards were invited during each authorization period to join the Maritime Security Program. The last time an authorization was made where qualified shipping lines could join in 2003, less than 2 years before the full reauthorization of the MSP in 2003, terrorists had hijacked and flown planes into Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in Manhattan. The parallels between the destruction of the Lusitania and the World Trade Center, though nearly a century apart, are striking. Both events were succeeded by the United States' entrance into a long and bloody wars. Bush could have used the overwhelming war support to restart the naval shipbuilding program and maintain a much higher level of sailor numbers throughout the Navy. Instead, he reauthorized the MSP. The shippers who participated would receive a government subsidy so that it could maneuver operations to wherever the Navy needed them to move cargo. The capital investment allowed these smaller shipping lines to begin competing for commercial cargo in whatever U.S. jurisdiction they would operate from. This leads to the second reason for the MSP's existence. Under the law that authorizes the MSP, those ships registered under the MSP would be active and properly maintained and available for use by the military in the event of war upon request by the Secretary of Defense. More than merely a logistical and financial solution for the government, the MSP has provided our nation with the full naval fleet and a standard of war readiness not achieved in U.S. military history until this program came about. You may wonder, in order to bring down the cost of ship construction for the U.S. government, why wouldn't Congress and the President simply abolish the 100-year-old Jones Act? Well, first of all, a bunch of people in Washington are still holding out hope for the brand name on the price tag, made in the USA. And then there's the real reason. The Jones Act is one of the more famous pieces of protectionist policy in the United States history. Its restriction on competition against American shippers represents one of the longest and largest subsidies given to any industry across the free market. Indeed, thanks to the Jones Act, the American shipping industry has shrunk, yet its profits manage gleeful smiles from accountants and the corporate executives they count the money for. Matson, a Jones Act company, posted profits for the past several years and even gave a $4 million bonus to its CEO 2 years ago. Matson and the remaining Jones Act shipping companies belong to a small sector of the only industry in the post-Sherman antitrust laws era, where one company is able to attain a monopoly legally and with impunity. These Jones Act companies have created intricate networks of lobbying and renting the consequences and decisions of Washington power broker in order to keep the Jones Act alive.
So before I continue the story, I forgot to do something in the beginning of the newscast, and that was to ask you, and well, first to thank you for the past few episodes when we've asked you guys to share from the live episodes. It's been crazy successful. Thank you so much for doing that and for helping us. I'm going to ask you if you can do it again, and actually for all of these episodes, I'm going to ask that you just right now, if you could find the share button at the bottom of the screen. If you press it, it won't take you off of the live stream. It'll give you an option to post it to your page or to like a group page or something. Just go ahead and choose any of those. Share it as many times as you want so that more people get this message. Thank you. So let's continue with the story. In the last election cycle, Matson was a major political donor to Washington politicians, giving $118,474 in political chinchuli to the elections of key people who could protect their beloved Jones Act, and also to kill the Maritime security program. These donations were divvied up to the individual campaigns of certain office holders, the political action committees that front for them, and both major political parties. They did this to avoid the everyday citizen's knowledge of the full scope of their contributions and to live within the donor limits parameters. All but one member of the Hawaii congressional delegation received political donations, chief among them United States Senator Mazie Hirono. Now, one would think that Hawaii's elected officials would feel the same way that a reasonable person living in Guam, the CNMI, Palau, Yap, Ponape, Chuuk, Alaska, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, American Samoa, or Hawaii would feel about an untamed, unchecked shipping monopoly. In an April 19 filing in the U.S. District Court of Washington, D.C. regarding this issue, Candid learned that Matson's political contributions to her campaigns have been more than successful at purchasing her allegiance to the Jones Act. It would have been one thing if Senator Hirono misrepresented her people. In this April 19 filing, which references a letter written by Hirono to the U.S. Department of Transportation opposing DOT's approval of the APL Guam, that's the ship that APL uses to service the Guam market. The filing states, in quote, while APL's second application was pending, Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii, Matson's home state, sent a letter to MARAD expressing concerns about APL's application as well as the agency's previous approval of the APL Guam. Senator Hirono asserted that it was improper for MARAD to allow an MSP vessel in the Guam trade. Once APL became aware of the senator's letter, it submitted a response which reiterated the significant military and commercial benefits from APL's service. APL also explained that the senator's complaints about unfair competition in the Guam trade were legally unfounded because Section 53105A of the Maritime Security Act provides APL with an absolute right to serve Guam. Nothing demonstrates the epitome of disgusting political corruption and greed than the colonial actions of this Hawaii senator, who has no business representing the people of Guam or any jurisdiction outside of her state. She made representations to a federal agency using her influence and office in the Senate to try to harm the Guam economy by stopping APL's entry to the Guam market. First of all, why was a Hawaii senator trying to harm Guam and in the process her own people of Hawaii? Secondly, where was Congresswoman Madeline Berdallo when this was going down? Records candidate gathered from the Federal Elections Commission show that during her campaigns for Congress, Matson was one of, if not her top fundraising contributor. The company donated $29,000 for her elections. This may very well explain the former Congresswoman's deafening silence about the Jones Act and how the repeal could have relieved the rising prices, burdening almost every product on the island store shelves. And what of other American territories and their representatives? If Matson succeeds in regaining its monopoly, prices surely will rise in Guam. But the consequence to the smaller and less densely populated islands throughout Micronesia will be unbearable for their economies, unaffordable for our brothers and sisters throughout the region. Where were their leaders when Matson first took its swing using a powerful member of the Senate from Hawaii as its proxy against Guam and APL? Matson's first assault on its competitor was followed quickly by the consolidation of its influence among the Calvo administration in power at the time. During the crane crisis in 2012, then Vice Speaker B.J. Cruz had learned of 2 used cranes at the Port of Los Angeles that the LA government was willing to sell to Guam for $1. Mr. Cruz told then Seaport Board Chairman Dan Saidinko and then Vice Chairman Mike Benito about the opportunity. Mr. Benito quickly told Matson. Matson purchased the cranes and brought them to Guam in an agreement that cost the ratepayers an annual rental fee and that left Matson in charge of the maintenance of the cranes. While Matson controls 70% of the shipping market in Guam, those cranes break down far less often when unloading Matson ships than when APL ships are offloaded. To make matters worse, anecdotal evidence is painting a clear picture showing that the downtime of the cranes during maintenance when APL ships are under them is significantly greater than downtime when Matson ships are under those cranes. Matson didn't stop there. We previously mentioned that the last full reauthorization of the Maritime Security Program that provided opportunity for APL to enter the market and compete against Matson was in 2003. Another reauthorization was granted in 2013. However, that provision was a compromise. During discussions on the fiscal year 2013 National Defense Authorization Act, which is the legal instrument that has been used since 1986 to authorize the MSP, the Hawaii delegation managed to have the entire provision for the MSP removed from law, well, from the draft bill. This effectively would have killed the program and forced APL and any other MSP shipper operating in the United States from operating these routes. Again, former Congresswoman Madeleine Berdallo remains silent, forfeiting Guam's natural protestations to whatever decisions her friend Senator Hirono would make. Reasonable members of Congress who stand nothing to gain from the territories were the congressional leaders who stood up for the territories. Thanks to their concern for our welfare, and no thanks to the congressional delegation from Hawaii, the Pacific and Alaska, these true friends of Guam were able to strike a compromise and place the MSP back into the National Defense Authorization Act. The problem with this version is that for the time since 1986, the MSP would no longer be available. For other shippers to participate in. Sorry, I'm using the teleprompter and I just lost my place. The ships with existing MSP recognition were grandfathered into the program through the length of its authorization. So from 2013 to 2025, thankfully, APL gets to remain on Guam, but nobody else can enter the market through this program because of Senator Hirono's compromise. Despite Senator Hirono's aggressive loyalty to Matson at the expense of every Guam family, Matson's efforts to remove the competitor via closed-door negotiations in Congress had failed. On November 27 last year, following that failure to shut down the MSP so it can clear the way for a Matson monopoly, Matson had a complaint for civil relief against the U.S. Department of Transportation. They filed the case not in the District Court of Guam, but in the Court of Washington, D.C. Here's where the Jones Act causes perhaps one of the most bizarre requests for civil relief before a U.S. court by a business. In its complaint, Matson argues that the court should compel the U.S. Department of Transportation to revoke APL's ability to operate ships in the Pacific under the Maritime Security Program. Matson complains that the subsidy APL receives gives APL a competitive advantage, even though the market share is split 70-30 in Matson's favor. Matson, in this very civil complaint, complains that when APL entered the market, it was able to, quote, offer significantly lower prices, unquote, forcing Matson to re-examine its price schedule. These are Matson's own words in the filings. Aside from the absurdity and the duplicity of the statements in these filings, the timing of the action is peculiar. In its role of support for the military under the MSP, APL naturally will receive the contracts for the movement of raw materials, construction materials, equipment, and supplies for the military buildup here. But it's not just a sea mission to and from Guam. The work orders will heavily involve Tinian, where the second firing range is planned. This is not to mention the movement of resources for the buildup to other outposts unknown to the public at this time, but planned and part of it. In all, whoever holds the MSP designation will be trusted by the country to handle the movement of goods of an $8 billion construction program. A few days ago, Matson filed a motion for summary judgment in this case, requesting that the judge grant the request for relief and sorry, I'm trying to read this stupid word. And compelled the U.S. Department of Transportation to release APL from the MSP, effectively kicking the company out of Guam, CNMI, Hawaii, and the rest of Micronesia. Days later, on April 19 this year, APL filed a cross motion for summary judgment, asking the court to dismiss the case altogether. Except for one letter of support from Governor Ralph Torres of the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, the current governments of the places where people would be most affected by Matson's monopoly are clearly absent from this suit. The suit may end in a few days with a federal judge in Washington, D.C. having little to no knowledge of our island or any of our neighboring islands, deciding on a matter that will render us economic slaves to one shipping company if the wrong decision is made. There is no amicus curiae from the Guam legislature or the current governor. The Guam Chamber of Commerce already has said without qualification that it will not stand up for the interests of the people of Guam and file an amicus brief on the people's behalf. Of every federal law or every federal issue there ever has been between Guam and the US government, save for the colonization of Guam issue itself, no federal issue affects a wider spectrum of our citizens in such a deep and lasting way as the Jones Act. Yet it is one of the least discussed federal issues by our leaders. Candid is changing the trajectory of this discussion. In the days ahead, we will be presenting you with the on-record comments of our political leaders. We are so sick and tired of the business as usual, the politically choreographed responses, the thoughtless niceties, and the brainless gibberish and deception. The Jones Act is the enduring face of an American system slipping further and further into plurocracy, a government by the rich and for the rich and the few. It is legislation that cuts the flow of oxygen from the Chamber of Commerce's beloved free market system and provides ridiculous protection of existing corporations from the threat of competition. And yet, despite the Chamber of Commerce's strong stances against the minimum wage, health benefits for children and families, and against a tax increase to fund government operations, it somehow has misplaced its spine in forming an opinion about a federal law drowning the people in debt and rooted in America's longest standing assault against the free market itself. And it wasn't even a law enacted upon the virtue of statesmen. The Jones Act is named after Wesley Jones, who was a United States Senator from Washington State. Having no regard for the law's consequences on the Indios of the United States' newly acquired territories, Senator Jones chiefly was concerned for the amount of money to be made among shipper and shipbuilder friends along a route of commerce between Washington and the then territory of Alaska. So Senator Jones packaged the self-serving financial opportunity in bows of animus, freshly sown by the terror and gore of the First World War that had just ended, added confetti of patriotism, asked his fellow members of Congress if it was good to go, and then send that box to us heathens and in the territories. And in it, what we found were middle fingers pointing straight at our pockets, along with ear guards for every politician since then who said or did little to nothing about a law that has so mightily hurt our lives. The entire impetus for the Jones Act was a lie. Its legislative construction was mounted upon a veiled attempt to make the greed of the few look instead like a concern for American jobs and national security. Only the rich have ever benefited from this sleazy law. And even the world's greatest armed forces has suffered because of it. A little known fact about Matson is that it doesn't need to be a Jones Act shipper. It has every right to shed the regulatory protection it receives at values far exceeding $5 million annually, and it can become a maritime security program company. Throughout its court filings, Matson constantly complains that APL's participation in the MSP, availing APL of the annual $5 million from the US DOT's Maritime Administration, or MARAD, gives APL the advantage over it. If that were true, APL would have had over 50% of the market a long time ago. And if Matson were genuine in its belief that the MSP somehow is superior in attracting business and profits for a shipping company, then why has it not joined the MSP in all these years? For Matson, the wartime stipulation in the MSP is neither an opportunity nor an honor to be called into the service of the country, especially because the very need for that service and its ships was caused by the government's sacrifice of its great navy so that Matson and companies like it could live under the protection of a law that ironically was meant to protect the American people and their sailors at sea. For Matson, the use of its ships by the Secretary of Defense during war epitomizes lost opportunity. It is for them a gross aberration of their business model, especially one that, not surprisingly, likely already has plans ready to deploy a fleet during time of war, but certainly not in service to the country, but by a contract forged by the coffins of American heroes. Perhaps what is most shameful about Matson and the silence of our leaders so far is Matson's dogged determination to weaken our national security just so its company can make a few more dollars. On the one hand, the smaller and not so profit-rich company or shipper, APL, has pledged to the Secretary of Defense the use of its fleet if and when war should happen and America called upon her. Matson, on the other hand, was not content with simply removing APL from the market. They needed to get rid of the Maritime Security Program in the advent of the largest military buildup in our history, which would guarantee Matson's monopoly over all shipping during this period while removing any possibility that the country can call on those ships to do its part when the country needs them most. That tells you all you need to know about the lengths one company will go for its customers, our country, and her people, and the lengths another company will go to hoard every bit of cash it can make from a military buildup it won't commit a single one of its ships to, despite nearly 100 years of protection this country has given that company. They aren't just greedy. They care not for the priceless cost of freedom and citizenship. And their patriotism ends with the termination of every rental agreement they make with corrupt politicians. This has been part one of our series regarding the Matson monopoly attempt. We'll be back tomorrow with part two and with a new feature story where we look into the wrongful death of Asher Dean Lubofsky. From Candid News, I'm Troy Torres from Haggadah. Good night.